Upstanding happens one act, one moment, one strength at a time, and standing up changes everything. This is the Upstander Ripple Effect.
Hello, I'm Kevin Aldridge.
And I'm Jackie Congedo.
And welcome to episode 3 of season 2 of the Upstander Ripple Effect. And it's good for me to be back with you all because I was absent from the last episode. First time I've missed, and I was bummed out about that. But good to be back with you all. And we've got another exciting episode today. And we're going to get into the conversation about AI. You know, as AI grows and it develops, it opens up a world of wonderful opportunities, but it also creates a world of concern, particularly in a time when we're living in an age of a lot of misinformation and disinformation, that folks are finding all new ways to utilize AI, and not in a good way, particularly when it comes to Holocaust remembrance. But we'll get into that just in a moment. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Jackie, and she's going to introduce our guest for today.
Yeah. And so it is a privilege to have Steve Coppel with us for a conversation here off the top. And we've been joking that, you know, Steve is is severely underpaid as a volunteer at the Holocaust and Humanities Center because he's been with us pretty consistently. I mean, you're with us a lot anyway on a normal run, but the last week has been, I think, deeply impactful, and we've been with you a lot because we've had the privilege to open this massive traveling exhibition on Auschwitz, the most comprehensive presentation of artifacts from Auschwitz outside of the site in Poland, on display now, on exhibit now at Union Terminal. And Steve, your dad's story, Werner's story, is really a foundational part of this experience. So tell us what it's been like over the last week to, you know, have seen this project come to fruition and to see your dad's story as part of it.
Well, thank you both for the opportunity. The exhibit for me is personal, and I had no idea prior just how meaningful this exhibit would be. It's one thing to read a book, it's another thing to see a picture, but to walk amongst 500 different artifacts, some directly related to my father's experience, I had no idea how impactful that would be to me personally, to our family. It's a rare opportunity that I'm going to cherish for the rest of my life.
It's been amazing to have sort of a front row seat to watch this come to life and to watch your involvement with your family's involvement with it. You talked about the artifacts. One really special artifact from the collection we have of your father's belongings and documents is the suitcase. And so tell us a little bit. This is on display now in the Auschwitz exhibition for the first time ever. Tell us about the suitcase and what that symbolizes for you.
Well, the suitcase is a trunk that was sitting in the attic my whole time growing up. I can still picture exactly where it was. Come up the steps, it was on the left-hand side. And then when I saw the suitcase again on display, it dawned on me, I had to be this old to realize this, everything my parents and my brother had when they came to this country was packed in that suitcase. Mm-hmm. Their whole life was in one trunk. I mean, imagine starting over. You don't speak the language. You don't have a job. You don't have a place to stay. Everything you own is in one suitcase. And, oh, here I am. There were 2 other artifacts that absolutely, I would have to say, rocked me. Was the bed frame from Bunamanowitz. I mean, that's what my dad would have slept on. And then there were the 2 walls from the barracks. The window was in the wall. And, you know, I tell you candidly, I almost broke out in a sweat. Seeing those 2 objects, I thought, oh my God, I'm really here. And it was incredible.
Yeah. I have to say, and so this is Steve. This is your and my first time meeting each other in person. But as I said when we met before, I feel like I know you, and I through not only you, the telling of your dad's story, and everything that I've learned about him. And I felt exactly the same way that you felt when I saw that suitcase. And in fact, I think we've talked about it on the podcast. I know how much stuff I have in my house right now. I have trouble packing for to go out of town for a weekend, and I can't imagine trying to put one's entire life into a suitcase and moving to as you mentioned, a new unfamiliar place where you're having to start over. And I think that no object sort of brings the humanity of your dad's story home quite like that when you really take the time to sit down and process that. And as well as I'm sure many of the other artifacts, it's what connects the humanity of us trying to imagine ourselves in your dad's shoes and what that must have been like. And I think that's what really, brings home the stories of survivors like your dad. And certainly I have a lot of respect for that and appreciate his contribution in the telling of his story and, fighting back against misinformation and disinformation himself. So just a wonderful family legacy.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your dad's sort of famous quote, right? What he would regularly say when he would speak to kids or to audiences about that suitcase that he, arrived at Union Terminal with a wife, a baby, and a suitcase, and that ended the first part of his life. And now, if you come to the Auschwitz exhibition at Union Terminal and you push play on the audio tour, on the audio guide, your dad's voice is the first thing people hear when they walk into the exhibition, is him recounting exactly that. What was it like for you to hear his? I mean, you hear his words on occasion in recordings, but in that context, what was it like for you to hear that?
The exciting thing for me is I have 3 grandchildren. They're actually going to hear their great-grandfather's story. They're going to actually hear his voice. They're going to actually see him at his prime. For me, that's a gift. I'm debating in my mind about Holocaust education for my 3 grandchildren, when to start, how to do it, how to go about it. This is going to help me tremendously. I'm gifted that I've got that at my fingertips. And the other thing is, when I miss my parents, which I often do, as we all do, I'm sure, but I get to walk down to the museum and visit my parents. You can't explain that to people.
Yeah. I think about your dad and what it took to rebuild. And there's I think, a really powerful story after he had come to Cincinnati and, built a new life and a business, and of the business burning down and what he told you when it burned down. And I think this perfectly encapsulates that spirit of perseverance that your dad embodied through his whole life. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Dad had started a business, literally started it in our basement. I mean, I'm in junior high. I would go down in the afternoons and pull orders and that kind of thing. And it started in our basement. It grew, and eventually he was in a building in Evendale, multiple businesses, block-long building. And one afternoon, actually on a Jewish holiday, the business was open. He was not at work. His staff called to say the business is on fire. What had happened was the company behind did furniture refinishing. Their chemicals caught fire. We drove down there. We're watching it all burn to the ground. And I'm standing next to my dad, and I said, well, what do we do now? And he looked at me and he said, start all over tomorrow. Now, I can tell you this. That's what got my dad through Auschwitz, through life. But as a young boy, all of us are going to face times when life is throwing us one hefty curve. And I didn't realize it then, but now that I look back, there are times when I, like most of us, I've had to kind of remember my dad's philosophy, start all over tomorrow. And I passed that on to my kids, to my grandkids. That was probably the greatest tip of advice a father can give to his son.
Wow, that's just amazing. I'm just sitting here in awe, just inspired by that, and just thinking about as we go through our lives, and big challenges or small challenges, that notion of, hey, just pick yourself up, start back tomorrow, and move forward. And I think that's just an incredible, shows incredible resilience, incredible, mental and emotional toughness to be able to have that type of attitude. And it's just really, again, just when you think you can't think he's any more remarkable than what he already was, you hear stories like that. So thank you for sharing that. That's the first time I'd heard that particular story.
And it's knowing his history and what he had been through. It is inspiring for sure, but it's not surprising coming from your dad, because this is how he lived his life. I mean, I think about, yes, the resilience and the stamina, but also it's like the courage to have hope after you have suffered such a blow. And I'm talking about his experience during the Holocaust, and then of course, subsequent letdowns in the rest of his life, such as, what happened to the business. But when you have been treated so poorly and you have every reason to dismiss forever humanity broadly, like I've had it, there is no hope. The resilience and the courage to have hope that your dad lived, to me, is a deep source of inspiration daily. And I know for visitors, both at the Holocaust and Humanity Center, and now for the hundreds of thousands, hopefully, of visitors who come through the Auschwitz exhibition, they'll be able to take that with them. Because, the question I always ask myself is, if people like your dad can come through an experience like that and feel hopeful, I'm not really sure what our excuse is.
Well, my brother pointed out the other day a very interesting observation. He said, as talking for himself, he said, there are days when things aren't going right and you're getting frustrated or you're getting upset or things are really going sour for you. And he said, then I think about our dad and what he went through, and he said, I kind of come to the conclusion that maybe my problem isn't so big after all.
Yeah.
But the interesting follow-up to that story and a tribute to my father is that after that fire event, every one of his employees came up to him afterward and said, Werner, don't worry, we'll show up for you, we'll work, you don't have to pay us.
Wow.
So that set for me an example of how you conduct yourself, that your employees are willing to say, you don't have to pay me, we'll be here.
That's leadership by example.
Absolutely. Testament to character and what type of person that he was.
His life was such a blessing and a gift to all of us, continues to be that. And again, Steve, thank you for joining us and for sharing a little bit about what this last whirlwind week of opening of this massive exhibition has been personally for you and for your family. It was great to have your brother with us, who was that baby who came through Union Terminal with the suitcase, and your dad's wife and your mom. And please come see Auschwitz not long ago, not far away at Union Terminal. It's you will be changed and transformed having been through it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And most importantly, thank you to everyone that was involved in bringing that exhibit to Cincinnati. Personal, for the entire community, for the entire tri-state, for anybody who comes, thank you.
Wow, what an honor, what a wonderful story that Steve had to share about a wonderful man and his dad, and you can tell that just by Steve and who he is, that he comes from great stock. And so we were lucky to have him here with us on the podcast today. And I think his story and Werner's story transitions us well into the conversation that I want to have next, which I mentioned off the top, is about the role that AI plays in Holocaust remembrance and the telling, quite frankly, the telling of the stories of people like Werner Coppel and others, that we've heard about here in Cincinnati and nationally. And as great as AI is, and as many doors as it's unlocking, and as much as it's, making some parts of our daily lives that much easier, there also comes with that some really, really deep concerns about, AI fakes and all of these different things. And so, Jackie, why don't you tell us a little bit about, what we've been seeing as it relates to some fake photos that would, or videos that have even been coming out about Auschwitz.
Yeah. So just to kind of start where you left off, I think that AI is transforming the way the world happens, everything in our day-to-day lives and beyond. And so the work of education about history, specifically in this context, Holocaust education, is no exception. But I think it raises real, ethical and other important questions about, how this memory is received and passed along. And so, just to kind of get us started, while we were opening the exhibition, we had a number of the folks who lead the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum in Poland. So this is the museum that has been established on the site at Auschwitz. And they actually candidly brought up, before I even knew we were talking about this, that they're dealing with these photos, these sort of completely fake AI-generated photos that content creators online will use AI to produce and allege that they are authentic from inside the camp at Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And historically valid, and they'll post them, and they're not necessarily in them explicitly, overtly hateful, but I think they're done more, from what the staff at the ABSM museum was sharing. They're done more to get clicks and likes, and
right.
For people to engage with it and to build a following. And so, but it's really concerning because now, how do we know what we read and what we see is true?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge concern, and I would especially say with so many Holocaust deniers out there now.
Yeah.
That right now you talked about these fake photos haven't really done much to, they are negative, they haven't done much to be harmful in a negative light. But we do know that there are plenty of bad actors out there who want to who want to paint false narratives about history.
Yeah.
And in this day and age where a lot of people are trying to sort out what is fact from fiction, what is truth from lies, it only further muddies and complicates the waters, where I think people have to lean in and rely on organizations like the Holocaust museums and official organizations who are responsibly telling the history of these things to determine what's authentic and what's not. But unfortunately, in our digital age, people don't do that kind of extra work. Like they kind of they share, they discuss, they talk about things that are completely not real all the time. And that's the scary thing about it.
Yeah, especially if it's content that brings about an emotional response. And so, I think part of the concern around denial, I mean, we have a amazing interactive exhibit at the Holocaust and Humanities Center at Union Terminal called Dimensions and Testimony. And we're one of 12 museums in the world that host this technology where you can actually, the short story is you can ask a question to a two-dimensional video image of a survivor, and you can receive an answer in real time. Now, what's really important about that, and anytime anybody asks me about this technology or they say, oh, what's that AI exhibit you have? I'm really quick to say it's not an AI exhibit. The content is authentic content. These are real recordings of real answers from a real person. They're not manipulated by AI. There's no synthesis that happens there. There is an algorithm that learns the more audiences engage with the technology. It learns how to more adaptively and more responsively, pull up the right answers, right? So it's the answer that responsively responds to the question that's being asked. But it's not a fake answer. It's not a synthesized answer in any way. It is a real clip of a real testimony from a real person. And so I worry that, absent those kinds of really explicit descriptions and reassurances, deniers will say, well, if that's made up, then the whole thing's made up, right? It's just like it provides this license or a slippery slope for all of a sudden, do we question everything that's presented? Is every photo a hoax? And so this is why I think, to your point, institutions like ours and others that are entrusted to be stewards of the history and the credibility that we carry in being able to sort fact from fiction and only tell the true story and the authentic narratives, this is getting more and more important. There will be fewer places where people can reliably source that information.
Yeah, and I think getting that message out, because as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, and this was a question I wanted to ask you, and you can answer it, and then I can finish my point. But the explicit explanation that you just laid out, do you have that on display in the exhibit, or is there anywhere that you notify viewers of the exhibit that this is how this comes together? And have you thought about that?
So we do not refer to the exhibit as AI anywhere. It's very specific, the language that we use to talk about it, which is 2-dimensional recordings of. And so it's really in other people asking about it, or they'll say, "Oh, I heard about the AI that you have," and I'm just quick to correct every time, I know what you're talking about. It's our dimensions and testimony, and this is actually the testimony of, in this case, right now, Dr. Al Miller, who was a survivor who we lost several years ago, who before he passed away recorded this testimony, and now you can engage with it interactively. But it is all his words, recorded, real, authentic.
Yeah. And so I think what you just explained there is what the challenge that's present in this environment now, right? Because your answer was the people who ask you about it, you're able to give that explanation to. But what about all the people that come through that exhibit who aren't asking and who assume that it's AI generated? And that's what makes what you just outlined out there is, how do you get the right information in the hands of everybody? And that's what is so difficult, because you can't. It's so hard to message and to try to make sure that message gets and touches everybody before false and fictitious things get shared. Like, that stuff travels quicker than your corrections can travel.
Absolutely.
And that's the unfortunate thing and the danger zone that we live in right now with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, as we were sort of preparing for this and looking at what people have been writing about it. There's more and more that's being written about the use of AI in the space of sort of education about history. And even in my role, I've talked to a number of folks who are working in this space who approach us and say, listen, we've got technology and it can animate historical figures, and you can engage with these people, icons of the past who lived these momentous, occasions, or this history in person, and we can basically bring them back to life. And we were talking with Steve about this beforehand, and his big question was not necessarily my first question, because that's not my vantage point, but certainly from his vantage point, he says, wait a minute, do they have the permission of this person who is no longer living to essentially AI generate their lived experience? There's a story written by Benjamin Charles Germain Lee in Long Reads, and he talks about his he is the child of survivors, or a survivor, and he talks about how his grandmother, it was his grandmother, I believe, who was the survivor. He talks about how he engaged with the dimensions and testimony technology, and even he felt that was imperfect.
Yeah.
How can you boil down the complexity of someone's lived experience in, a quick soundbite that's an answer to a question, and that the totality of someone's humanity and their experience is kind of lost in that kind of an interface?
Yeah. But I think that's the challenge, sort of, with it's not just with those types of exhibits, but I think that's the challenge of history in general, right? Yeah. Because whether we're talking about Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln or a Holocaust survivor or Harriet Tubman or whomever, these are people who are no longer with us, and so we can't fully get the context to answers that we would love to ask them that would fill in the gaps of what has been documented or what we do know, because everything that I've learned in history, I have tons of questions about that I wish I could ask MLK that only he can answer.
Yeah.
You know, that
right.
that no AI, no matter how much information you feed it, can it actually give you what a person might actually have said in an answer to a question, because their thoughts are their thoughts. I'm my dad's son, and I can tell you what I think he might have said based on what I know, but I can't tell you 100% that would have been his answer, right? Because my dad surprised me sometimes in terms of things that he would say. So that's the challenge that we have in our telling of history in general, that if it wasn't in notes or things that they wrote down themselves, if it wasn't in recordings, I think some of those gaps that they leave are sort of forever lost to us.
Yeah. I mean, in this piece that I was just referencing, the author talks about engaging with this AI chatbot interface that someone had developed, sort of animating the persona of Anne Frank. Mm-hmm. And he engaged with it, in a way where he asked, how did you feel in Auschwitz? This was, over the computer. So he was typing this, and he knew full well that Anne had stopped writing in her, in her journal by then. Mm-hmm. And so, he's wondering what is this thing going to say? And it gave an answer. It gave an answer about what she felt. Mm-hmm. Now, there's no way anyone knew, right, what she felt when she arrived there. And yet now this is part of this swirl of information that's out there. Mm-hmm. And someone who doesn't, to your point, who doesn't know the context about this, mm-hmm. wouldn't know. Wouldn't know it's not authentic and it's not real. So it's a very it's a slippery slope. And I think there's this allure of having technology that can, that sort of teases us with, reanimating the past, or being able to bring to life people like you're talking about who, gosh, I would just die to ask that question to that person.
Yeah.
Well, the reality is you can't.
You can't do it because you have no way. I mean, I think what AI does in that case is it probably goes back and trolls everything that it has about Anne, and it comes up with synthesizes an answer on what it thinks, just as we would. Like as I just used my father as an example, if you asked me a question about, hey, what would your dad have said about this? I would give you an answer based on my experience with him, things that I heard him say, and I would be giving you a close approximation to what I think but that doesn't mean that that's what he would say. And so I think,
and that's not disclosed in here.
Right.
Oh, well, actually Anne stopped writing before she,
absolutely.
So we don't know, but based on, what she had written, this is what could be supposed that she would have felt. Mm-hmm. There's no disclaimers going on here as part of this interface.
Absolutely. And I think as keepers of history, like anybody who's keeping authentic history, I think you do have to be very careful. And as a journalist, I can totally relate to this. It's just like sometimes just stick to the facts. Report what you know. Don't get off into these dangerous areas of making assumptions, because not some of the time, not part of the time, 100% of the time, assumptions always are wrong, and they make you look foolish most of the pretty much every time. And so I think museums and purveyors of history use the technology but stick to the facts, as you kind of said, actual recorded testimonies from individuals and people like that are reanimated and just sort of
made interactive.
Yeah, made interactive. I think that's great because you're sticking to the facts. You're not driving off into these areas of leading people down sort of these philosophical, and that's really what they are. They're philosophical discussions about what somebody might have said or might have thought. I think that's great if you're in a philosophy museum, but I think you need to be careful about doing that presenting it as fact in history. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and there's some other interesting sort of work happening in this space. There's a group of folks who are working on some technology that brings to life using actual pictures of people who were part of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Mm-hmm. And they basically use this picture. They ask AI to animate the picture, and then they feed the AI a transcript that this person wrote, right, about what that was like on that day, what the uprising was like, and they're rolling it. And so it basically just reanimates the verbatim testimony. I think even that is a little slippery because I could say something like this, or I could say something like this.
Yes.
And they have two different meanings.
Absolutely.
So, how do we know how someone meant something to be received, what their inflection was, what the characterizations on their face were as they were saying it? I just think all of that, there are baked in assumptions.
Absolutely. It's the classic text message that you receive.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, wonder how they meant that. Yeah. Right? And you're calculating what your response is, right? That's the perfect example, is that you can't, without being able to ask those individuals directly.
Yeah.
You're forever looking at this thing trying to calculate, is how I'm looking at this, is that accurate or not? And I just think we have to be very careful in historical spaces, and I'm right there with everybody else. I'd love to know these answers, and sometimes it's fascinating to go kind of down that rabbit hole of seeing things put together like that and seeing what comes out of there. But as you said, with the disclaimers, like knowing that this isn't actually factual,
right?
It does just kind of allow you to entertain that fantasy element, which in essence is really kind of what it is, to sort of satisfy that itch that we have to fill in those gaps.
Yeah, and also it's like, don't shortcut that, right? I mean, do we want a robot combing through every page of Anne Frank's diary and trying on its own without any sense of humanity to deduce how she would have felt or what she would have said about something? Instead, read the diary.
Yeah.
Read the diary.
Yeah.
And then you can think about, after having read it and distilled it as a human being, what that experience could have been like for her or must have been like for her. And again, none of us will know. None of us will ever know. But we remove the human element out of it when we say robot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go do this for me.
And I think the more important question is, I shouldn't say the more important question, but maybe an interesting question that we should ask ourselves is not how did Anne feel? How did we feel after we read what Anne wrote? Because this is where the humanity comes in, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about to Steve about Werner's suitcase. Mm-hmm. I can imagine what it must have felt like. I can't know for 100% how Werner felt, but by looking at that suitcase and just imagining me as a human being, as a person, as a man with a family right now, if today I had to go home and somebody gave me a suitcase of that size and they said, whatever you can fit in here, that's it. And you got to go. And where you're going, you have no clue what's waiting for you when you get there. I mean, I don't have to know how Werner felt to know how I would feel, and would say in our common humanity, there's probably some similarity there.
Yeah.
So this notion of always having to know how that person felt, the better question is, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. That's a really good point. And I think there's so much in this exhibition that helps to connect. I mean, that's the power of artifacts.
Yeah.
Is that you can actually have a personal encounter with something that, puts you in a mindset where you can start to ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I could go on and on about all the artifacts in this incredible exhibition. There are so many that are just like that. So I'll just give you one example, because now we veered off the AI topic, but we're wrapping up here for the day anyway. Yeah. There is a shoe. So this is during, I think, the heaviest part of the exhibition, where there's the presentation of the history related to the death camps and the deportations and the gas chambers. And there is a shoe, and it's a child's shoe. And there's a sock in the shoe, and the sock was found in the shoe, in the near where they would have undressed to go into what they were told was showers, right? And so you're looking at this, and the first thing you think of is like, I have a child who wears that size shoes. And then you think about, who put the sock in the shoe? Was it the child who was well behaved and was sort of taught to do that, so that don't lose your socks again. When you come back out, you're going to need to know where they are.
Yeah.
Or was it the mother who, expecting that they would need those socks shortly, left them there? And those are all those kinds of questions that we'll never have the answer to, can connect us and our humanity across vastly different time and space.
Yeah.
To be able to internalize that in a way that I think is instructive and sort of connects us emotionally in a way that moves us differently than facts do.
Yeah. I just want to say this, that one, Cincinnati is incredibly lucky to be able to have an exhibit like this, and not just this exhibit, but a ton of really good things that flow through the city of Cincinnati. And I haven't had a chance to visit the exhibit yet, but it's definitely on my list.
You have some time.
Of things to do. And that leads me into my point about time, is that I think that when I think about how I experience museum, whether I'm traveling on vacation or whether it's the Freedom Center or the Holocaust Museum here, these aren't like just one time like visit type things. And I think sometimes that's how we think about.
I've seen it. I've done it.
Yeah. And even to sort of rush through, it's sort of like this rush through. Hey, I'm moving on to this next exhibit, but because we feel like we got to get it in. We're in such a rushed environment, and it really is like these exhibits or museums are meant to get what you just talked about with the shoe and the sock. You kind of gotta sit there with that for a minute. It's like staring at a piece of art at an art show. Yeah. Trying to see what you can interpret out of it. And I hope that people, and I intend to do this when I go check out the exhibit, is to really spend some time and not just be in such a hurry to move from one thing to the next and to try to digest it. Because I find myself getting in that hurried up mode, like, hey, I got to move on. I got to try to get in everything, because sometimes these museums and exhibits you might have to go once or twice, 2 or 3 times to take it in.
And this one is massive. This one is, I think you want to leave more than an hour to see it. Mm-hmm. You may want to, come back. There are some flex passes that the Museum Center, by the way, shout out to our incredible partners at the Cincinnati Museum Center and the team led by Elizabeth Pierce, who have been fearless and tireless in working to bring this here. But there are some flex passes where you can go and come back. And I think that's, allows you the breathing room to be able to digest it in a way that's meaningful. It's something everyone should see. It is what's been described as the closest thing to actually being able to go to Poland and see the site. And it's just so powerfully and respectfully and genuinely presented in this context at Union Terminal. Plus the fact that it's presented in the place, in this train station.
Yeah.
That has history in the building where survivors like Werner arrived, again, with a suitcase if they were lucky, and family if they were really lucky. And so it's really powerful. It's an incredible experience. Yeah. I'm thinking about pivoting. It's a good segue into our Upstander shout out, which is goes to a friend and colleague, Pawel Sawicki, who is the Deputy Communications Director. Pawel, I'm sorry if I got your title wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's the second in charge of sort of the information stream coming out of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, and an incredible human being. He and the team at ABSM, whose job it is every day. I mean, these are people who wake up every day and go to work in a place where humanity's darkest nature was sort of mechanized and operationalized. And they do it tirelessly, and they do it with such conviction and commitment. And in this case, I think very few, I don't think there are any people who are Jewish who actually do that work on site at Auschwitz, which is very different from the field of Holocaust education and museums in the States. And that's largely because of the role that survivors played in the origin of the field here. But the fact that people like Pawel and his colleagues who, are not Jewish, take this responsibility so seriously and devote their lives to caring for this legacy and this history and preserving it. It's actually breathtaking. I thanked him when he was here for just that. And his response to me was, well, it's not the Jewish responsibility. It's not a Jewish responsibility to educate about this. It's a human responsibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the way we ought to look at all history. Like it's all ours. We are all a part of this, human experiment on this planet. We're all a part of this American experience in America. And a lot of times we like to segment history into different parts when it's all one story. Like we're all a part of the same story.
We're all keepers of that story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I get it, it's because in many cases, Jewish history had to be told because nobody else was telling it initially. That's history.
That's Werner's origin story, speaking up to an op-ed that was filled with disinformation about the Holocaust and denial, and he said, "I survived this. I'm going to speak."
Yeah, absolutely. Same way with Black history. Black history was not being told, and so Black people started to tell it. And I think what tends to happen over time is we can become quite possessive of that history and mistrustful of those who haven't handled our history in the past respectfully or weren't willing to tell our stories. And so there's a certain protectiveness that we have of that, and maybe even a little of reluctance to sort of turn that over and trust people who are not a part of our culture, our religion, our race to tell those stories with the same amount of care. But there are good actors out there. There are people who do care about that history and who care about our overall history. And, I applaud them for taking on, the telling of this important story. And that's what we need more of. We need more people who are going to step out like that and who feel that obligation to tell the story without trying to gloss over any of the untidy or uncomfortable parts, but telling the true, authentic history so that we can learn from it. That's how we learn and grow and resist repeating the mistakes from the past.
So we'll give Pawel the last word. He's over the last week with the opening of the exhibition, he has been on every panel and in front of every camera that we could possibly get him in front of. And he shared this with us related to, what this exhibition says about the fact that Auschwitz was created by people who are not over there or different in some inherent way, but people who are human. Mm-hmm. And that's an important thing for us to wrestle with. So here's Pawel on that.
This is what the Holocaust was about, not only to kill people, but to destroy everything that defined them. So that's one thing we need to do. We need to rehumanize the victims, telling their names. But we shouldn't be tempted. We shouldn't kind of get or allow this temptation to lead us to dehumanize the perpetrators. It's so easy for many people to call them monsters, to tell that these are people from the outside world. We would never be able to do this. We, the humans, they were able to do it. These were people who did it. And understanding this is a very big and challenging thing for any one of us to do. But they were fathers and mothers, wives and husbands, sons and daughters. And we have to also look at this story from this human perspective, because if we ask the question, how was it humanly possible? It is not a question about the victims. It is a question about people who became perpetrators. No one is born a victim. No one is born a perpetrator. People can become perpetrators and turn others into victims. And we show this through different artifacts. We show their path. We show the ideologies that shaped them. You can stand at the desk of the Auschwitz commandant. And then when you think, for example, that the third commandant of Auschwitz, Richard Baer, was a 33-year-old confectionery maker when he became the commandant of Auschwitz and was responsible for the last and most deadly period of the camp's operation, it is something that should make us feel uncomfortable.
All right, so that was powerful by Pawel, just to think about that, humanizing the perpetrators. And I love what he said, that nobody is born a victim, nobody is born a perpetrator, but you can become a perpetrator and create a victim. And I just thought that was, that's a quote that we should all etch inside of our minds, because I think what he so eloquently stated there is that when we refer to these people as monsters and villains and whatever label you want to assign to them, again, that is dehumanizing them in a way that says that could never be me, right? But as he touched on, one of the greatest perpetrators of this atrocity was once a baker, right? Like he's fixing donuts and cakes and cookies, and the next thing
Yeah.
you know, he's murdering people. Like, how does one go from that, from one thing to the other? And I think and I always say this all the time, that as we're fighting for whatever it is that we believe in, that we have to be careful not to become the thing we hate in our fight
That's right.
for what we believe in. And it's so easy that when you believe in something so strongly, it's so easy to find yourself saying, particularly when you vilify or when you create such a contempt for people who are on the opposite side of the fight, it becomes easier to look the other way when unjust and ungodly things
Or to
happen
participate
to
in
them.
it.
To even participate into it, right? If you get whipped up,
If you believe what you're doing is right,
and here's what I say:
lost sight of someone else's humanity.
not to make this overtly political, but if you look at January 6th, I totally 100% believe that there were people who were a part of that mob who came there with no intention to commit, violent
Crimes.
or
Yeah, violent
illegal
crimes.
acts.
Yeah.
They got caught up in the moment. Some, don't get me wrong, there were some 100% bad actors who were involved in that, but I think there were some people who got swept up in the moment and wound up finding themselves being a part of something that I'm sure, and many did when they had to face the judge, own up to the mistake of being a part of that process. So,
Yeah.
Pawel hit the nail right on the head, that when we dehumanize the perpetrators, we in a sense let ourselves off the hook.
That's
and
right.
maybe
That's
even
exactly it.
and maybe even delude ourselves a little bit to the fact that we can't become monsters if we aren't careful.
Yeah. When I was in Jerusalem a couple months ago, I had the opportunity to meet with a survivor, Auschwitz survivor, who was one of the victims of Dr. Mengele's experiments. He experimented on twins, among others. Was a Nazi doctor at the camp, and she said, Auschwitz was not another world. It was not, again, these were not monsters. Auschwitz was a construct of our world. It was built by human beings. And so when we hold that leads to some really important, as Pawel says, some really important questions about how people who are part of a otherwise civilized, quote unquote, society, contemporary, industrial, these were people at the highest echelons of society who had advanced degrees and were cultured. How did someone in that place, in a place not so unlike our own, either stand by or participate in this mechanized mass murder? That is a very important question. And I think that we skirt the question when we say, those people who did that are over there and I'm over here. And that's why I think, yes, Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, meaning it's closer than you think. And it was sooner, than you think in our past, but not far away, meaning who am I
Personally.
And what am I, what choices, what distinguishes me from the person who stood by, perpetrated, or stood up. And that's the choices, the information we consume on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. So I think, he also said, or I believe it was either Pawel or maybe Michael Berenbaum, who was also with us, another scholar who has worked to put this exhibition together, among others. He said, this exhibition is a mirror. It's a mirror that we should, if we have the courage to look in. Yeah. And I think, I think there is no better definition of an upstander than someone who's willing to hold that mirror up and say.
But that's the challenge we face in these times, right? As we see even in our own country, as we see pushbacks against history, right? There are people who are afraid to hold the mirror up of what America has been. Like we don't want to talk about that because we think it generates, I don't know where this comes from, but we think it generates hate. I think what generates hate is the inability to confront the bad parts of our history and be honest and heal and reconcile from that. That's what creates the anger. That's what creates the animosity, is not the telling of history, but the lack of courage, as you said, to hold that mirror up and say and look at something that's ugly, but then challenge yourself to say, that's not me though. I don't want to be that.
And what makes me different?
Yeah. And,
ask ourselves what makes us different.
Absolutely. I always love to look at those, when I think back to, some of those old civil rights photos where they show of kids, being integrated into schools, and there are these white mobs of people who are holding signs and maybe spitting on kids or yelling at kids. And I say to myself, I always wonder about those people who are captured in those images. Did they ever think in that moment how history
would look back on
them and their actions? Did they ever think about that for a moment? And any of those folks who might still be alive today, and you're in one of those photos and you have to explain to somebody why you were there. It was a Dallas Cowboys owner, Jerry Jones. He was one of those people who got caught in one of those photos, and he got asked about it. And, he had an answer. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing we all got to ask ourselves is if we're in those, they probably won't be black and whites. There'll probably be some digital AI, maybe even AI generated images from this point in time. Hopefully they're historically correct. But how will history view us?
Right. And that is the intoxication of racism and anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. Because again, we can't go back and ask them. Yeah. But you might assume that if someone believes so wholeheartedly that their ideology is right, their ideology of dehumanization, a dehumanizing ideology, is morally righteous, mm-hmm. then that's all you need to know. So, we should question our own assumptions in that. And we should, I always say the Holocaust, there's a lot of lessons. One of the primary, most important in my mind lessons is the dangers of dehumanization, any dehumanizing ideology. Anytime you're able to look at someone else, another human being, I don't care who they are, and see them as less human than you, that is a dangerous place to be.
Absolutely.
So, all right, well, thank you for being with us. What a interesting conversation. It was great to have Steve, and the AI conversation continues to evolve, so I'm sure we'll get back to it at some point.
Won't be the last time, I'm sure we talk about it.
Yes, and we will see you next time for episode 4 of the Upstander Ripple Effect. Be sure to check out the links in the show notes and drop us a line if you have some thoughts about today's episode. Thanks for joining. The Upstander Ripple Effect is a production of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center. The center's mission is to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust inspire action today. This series is part of the Cynthia and Harold Gutman Family Center for Storytelling. Visit us in person at Historic Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio, or online anytime at holocaustandhumanity.org. The managing producer is Ann Thompson, technical producer is Robert Mills, and technical director is Josh Emerson. Select music is by Kick Lee, and this is recorded at Technical Consulting Partner Studios in Cincinnati, Ohio.